Yes, Bafundi. So we're going to continue with these trousers, just the fitting now yesterday, and everything's actually pretty perfect. There is still a little bit of a flare here on the pocket. So on the pattern, I've just shifted the seam again a little bit forward. And for this one, you'll see what we do there. A little bit tight here on the crotch, according to me. This client says, no, it's totally fine, but if I look at it myself, I feel this is a little bit tight. So we are going to be loosening that up a little bit between you and me, and then just finishing this up. So the first thing I want to do is just double check my measures here on the waistband. So let's see what we've got around here. And I always measure it in the round like this, it just feels a little bit more accurate. Then on the double, especially because the waistband is not straight. Remember this guy, you drop the front of the waistband. So this is like 113. Yes, I know I'm crazy. I'm going to measure it the other way as well. Just to be accurate. No, 113. So on my measurements, I've got it as 112. But yeah, there's a lot of extra layers coming here. So I think 113 is going to be safe. I'm just going to mark it down. And then I want to check what I did for the center back, which was 3 centimeters. So let me just note that down so that I can remember that. And before I carry on, I'm just going to get this into a workable position. Should take off this basting that was just to secure the center back. Also, the hand stitching tends to stretch a little bit, so it's quite common that when you stitch by hand, by machine, it actually turns out a little bit tighter. So having our final fit at 113 is actually totally fine, because then the final will be a little bit tighter than that. So yeah, now step number 1 is just pull out all of this basting and give all these pieces a nice iron so everything comes back flat. Let me go ahead and do that. There I've lifted everything apart. The only interesting thing I've done is put this piece of fusing here where I'm going to stitch the center back. And I think let's finish up this back piece because that's actually going to be easiest, the fastest to get from where we are to a finished thing. So here on the left side, there's nothing to do. I have on the pattern adjusted this dot to be 1 centimeter shorter. I just feel this bum is a little bit higher than this. But you know, obviously for this one, it's great deal. So all I want to do here is draw in the D stitches. And I like to measure that out. 1/2 centimeter. Just draw in that D stitch. And then I'm also going to stitching this buttonhole by hand, going over what I've already stitched there, and then I'll do bar tanks just along those edges, just to give everything a nice secure security. I do have videos on that, so I won't bore you with all the individual stitchings. I think let me carry on with that, and when I move on to the front piece, we'll come back for more of the video of fashion. There you can see hand stitch buttonhole, bar checks, D-stitches. Of course, ordinarily I would do that twice on the side of the pants as well, but for this chap, we're just having one pocket, very generously saving some of my time. And yeah, that's the back pieces done for now. So I'm just going to put that aside. Blase. Then on the front, so here on the fly, I'm going to also do a bar tack, and I do it sort of half a centimeter below the stitch of the fly and half a centimeter above, just a bar tack there. And then on this inside, let's put it like this. So here's your fly guard, and you want to attach that onto the seam allowance of the fly there. So I'll just come and put a little stitch there. Then as I was saying, these pockets are flaring a bit. So one thing we're going to do is just shift slightly forward, killing maybe half a centimeter of the pocket. No one will notice between you and me. And then I'm going to do a gather stitch here by hand. Just slightly, just to like really pull that pocket against the body. And as I said, on the pattern, I've corrected that. So the next chino we do for him, this seam is another centimeter forward, and I've added a centimeter on the back. But for this one, obviously, it's already done. Suppose I could unpick all of this and shift it, but that is just not happening. So I'm going to do that by machine because I only have one spool of this color, and then I'll come back and do this by hand. You can see that bar tack just there at the bottom of the fly, and on the reverse side, just stitch this portion down so that it doesn't flap open. It's nice stitch to that seam allowance. So for the pockets, this is just one little cheat that I sometimes do. I can't really say if the little bow that's here made such a difference, or if it was, if it would have flared more if it was straight. I do like the bow. I think it did actually end up hugging the body a little bit better. And at the end of the day, I think really my problem here is that the seam is too far back, and that's what's making these pockets flare, and that's just a problem with my patterning formulas, which I'm correcting as we go. So I've just put it over there to keep this all neat. I'm going to start right through from the bottom, and I've just marked out a half a centimeter there. So I'm just going to do a prick stitch and just give it a little bit of a tug. Not noticeable that it's gathered, but it'll be gathered. This is the beauty of hand stitching. Also that you get a lot of knots. So hopefully this will solve the problem. It flares so little that the client didn't actually notice, but of course I notice. That's my job. And as you can see, I've got 4 threads because this I don't want to be snapping and ending up with some loose threads all over the show. This is a little trick I've done on a couple gents' pockets. If we do the alteration and it ends up being too much on the center back seam, then the whole trouser is now moved. The pockets are moving basically onto the bums, these side pockets. So really what you need to do is open up the side seam and take that in. That is quite a job and costs quite a bit. So if you don't want to do that, then we just do this little bit of a gather stitch on the pockets just to pull that pocket close to the body. And that's that. I don't think there's too much more to say about that. You can already see it's just a little bit of gather. Obviously, I'll give this an iron afterwards so that it's not so obvious. And that's just going to help these pockets not to flare out like Dumbo ears. And then when that's done, we'll start putting front and back together. See, once this is ironed, you don't really notice that it's a gather, especially over the shape of the body. Hopefully, you will not notice that, and hopefully it will just pull a little bit closer to the body. And hopefully the next pattern that I've got sorted out is going to actually work. So like I was saying, the other thing that we're going to do is just shift the seam a little bit forward. So in other words, shifting this piece a little bit forward. So my original seam allowance was 2 centimeters. We're going to make it 2.5. Now, let me just look quickly on the pattern, what I did, because I want this to replicate the pattern, of course. So at the end of the day, I need to move this forward by just a smidge, because I can't really make it too obvious, because then also the pocket's going to be a lot smaller. So the original seam allowance was 2 centimeters. So I'm going to make it 2.5, and here maybe like 2.25. Just so we don't lose too much of that pocket, and then back here, back down to 2 centimeters. And then let's look. This is now our friend. So then on the back, we'll see if I'm adding 0.5 centimeter there. I need to subtract it from here. Well, you know what I mean. If I'm subtracting there, I must add here. So this becomes 1.5. It's now 2.25, so that should be 1.75. And then down here, back to 2. So if we're going to join there, the difference between 1.5 and 2.5 is 1. So our seam allowances should mismatch by 1, which is fantastic. The difference between 2.25 and 1.75 is 0.5 centimeter. So there we should mismatch just on the overlocking. Backed. And then here we're back to 2 centimeters seam allowance, completely matched. So here we're at 1.5 centimeters. Here we're at 1.75. Yes, that's good. 1.75. And then here we're at 2. Is that right? No, 1.75, 1.5. Okay, perfect. And then from there, 2 down. I should actually first check if my knee is matching, which not exactly. Let me sort out this knee quickly. I'm kind of having a flashback, thinking that actually my back is a little bit higher than my front for some obscure reason. Not by much, like 0.5 centimeter. Let me see, I'll still use 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. They just smooth it out there. And sometimes these things happen. How is it? You see, that's a little bit skew there, but how's my hem? It's such a small amount, but let's redo that. I always like to match from the knee. It's my safe space. Matching from the knee. It's not like half a centimeter mismatch here. That you can just account for with variation in how you're cutting. Because I'm cutting by hand, so got to just realize things are not going to be 1,000% accurate, and just make sure you make it accurate as you go. Okay. So it's done here. I'm just going to 2 centimeter seam allowance, nothing exciting. As I was saying, I feel this crotch a little bit too tight. So on the pattern, I've actually extended that just by 1 centimeter. And like I said, my formulas, I'm kind of working on them as I go. But I think actually I should just extend this portion of the crotch by 1 centimeter in the future. So back to doing this crotch here. So on the pattern, I've increased 1 centimeter just on this back portion because the front actually looks perfect. For this one, what I'm going to do is just reduce the seam allowance to 1.5 because that's going to increase with 1 in total between the front and the back. And I think measurements, make it by 11. I get back to the original seam allowance, which is 2 centimeters, and then 2 centimeters all the way down. Yeah, let me do that. I will be ironing open, even here, and then I just use a bar tack to force that pocket to lie where I want it to lie. And there, the sides are done. Nothing too exciting, except that here, for this pocket bag, and here on this crotch guard with the gusset, I go twice there because this is the portion that really needs some strength. And here also you're putting your hand in this pocket 100 times a day, so I just want that to be strong. From there, I will go and a little bit later put a bar tack here just to make sure the seam allowance is going to stay where I want it to stay. So just a bar tack along the bottom of the pocket there. And of course, I check my pockets that they're the same size. I do that before I do the double stitch. Sometimes I forget, and then I have to go back. That's just life. So here, I'm now going to put the waistband on. I could, of course, measure it out properly and do the under waistband one time, but my brain is a little bit fried at this exact time. So I'm just going to do it piece. Here I just want to see where is the top of my little fly guard there. And then I can just mark its half centimeter where I'm going to join the waistband. Here is my waistband. So here on this fly guard, I want to be a little bit over. I don't need too much. I just want to be able to make a triangular shape there. So I just kind of measure that with my eyes. Like I was saying, I could measure this all out beforehand, but it's bespoke, so I can just cut it way bigger than it needs to be and trim it down as we go. This does not seem to be working in my favor at this time. Just checking those measurements that it will be able to close neatly. And not pull in some funny direction. Next trouser I do, actually I should fix that on this chap's pattern as well. rather have this front portion straight, not coming at such an angle. We'll look at that for his next chino. Doing 2 chinos for this chap, which is always lacquer. Then you get to see if all the manipulations on your pattern did actually work. So yeah, nothing too exciting. I'm just going to be stitching this. Now here at the side seam where I've got this mismatch, you can just stop judging me as I kind of smooth that out just with my eyes. And yeah, the seam allowance at the top here is 1.5. Seam allowance on the waistband is 1. So I use the overlocking to kind of mark the half a centimeter mismatch. And yeah, there's always a little bit extra, which is great. I'll just cut that out. So I'm just going to stitch that. And then we'll be looking at the horsehair piece and also putting the shirt catch over here. Bafundi, can you believe I completely forgot that we need belt loops? And I can't really continue with anything else until those belt loops are done. So rewind, cut the belt loops. I usually do 4 on each side, 8 belt loops in total. So I cut this 45 centimeters, and then I'll cut it into 10, 10, 10 with a little bit of 5 for extra fun, and 4 centimeters wide. And I'll just halve that so that it's 2 centimeters, and then stitch about 1.5 centimeters seam allowance so that the whole thing is 1.5 centimeters. Is that right? Yeah, I'll stitch about 0.5 centimeter seam allowance. It's based on the industrial machine, which the foot is 6 mils. So we'll just use that as our guide. Actually, I usually stitch from this side so that I can keep it straight on the edge there, and then stitch about 0.5 centimeter seam allowance so that we have 1.5 centimeters breadth for the belt loop. So I'm going to do that. Nothing too exciting. The only thing is that I will sew that iron that seam allowance open. I'll first iron that seam allowance open, and then I'll turn it around so that when we turn it around, the seam is going to be just down the center back, not onto one side or the other. Let me sort this out. Here's the belt loops with the seam at the center back, so that when we fold this, we don't have like 20 layers of bulk on one side and nothing on the other, which is just harder to sew. Then I can just cut that straight and come along here, making 10 centimeter increments. Cut that out. So I think let's place this along. The other side will be symmetrical. Okay, so here on the front, I like to put 1 on the center front line. Now this one, because we don't have a crease here, no one knows where that is. But it is usually just the side of the pocket bag. So I'm going to put it there. On that side of the pocket bag. The pocket bag is cut to the center front, and then it has those seams, so it goes a little bit less. So if you put this right next door, it tends to be exactly on center front. Center front? Well, the center of this panel. And then I'll just measure this against the pocket so that I do that side the same. Here at the pocket, I like it to be kind of in the middle between the side seam and the pocket. These are just my personal preferences. I don't really think there's a rule for any of this, other than to not be a braid and do this before you put your waistband. Then here at the back, I like it to be, in a way, if it clamps down, to either be just over or just under where the lips of the pocket are, the edges of the pocket are. So in this case, I'm going to make it just under, because if it's just over, I feel it's too close to this belt loop. Make it just over, and I can measure that, which is now, let's make it 6 centimeters. And then that one I'll obviously do at 6 as well. And then of course the other side, same. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch that in. Then we'll come back and continue. So continue from there. So here is the bolt loops in. But before I iron this up, I'm going to put this piece of horsehair. The horsehair, this is the bouncy side, this is the soft side. So it's going to keep my waistband up like that. And I've cut 5 centimeters. I will trim that down in a moment. See here, on the underside of the fly, going kind of like halfway between the zip and the edge of the fly. And I'm just going around putting that. You can stitch this by hand, doing a back stitch. I am going to do a zigzag with the domestic machine. And then here, I actually don't want it to get too close into the center back. So I'll usually stop, this we're going to stitch at 3, so I'll stop around 4.5, maybe. I'll stop around 4. Just so that there's not so much bulk right here in the center back. And then here, I do want now it to come, because we put this shape, it folds over like that. You can obviously end it like that if you want. Just in this case, this is my style. 3 centimeters over there. And I do want the corset to come all that way. But we're not going to stitch this onto the seam allowance. So I am going to leave that portion. I'm just going to make it extra because I'll trim it down later. And then here, I'm not going to stitch past the zip. I'm going to leave that. You'll see in a moment, at the end of the day, we have to come here and stitch this. So if that is then already stitched onto the horsehair, it becomes difficult to stitch that portion. So I stop there around the zip. Just do a zigzag, holding it together, and then I'll iron everything up one time. You have it. So that's been zigzagged onto that seam allowance like so. You see here I didn't zigzag there. Then here I did a basting stitch, kind of maybe like 1.5, 2 centimeters from the top edge there. And the horsehair was more than this because I cut 5. And then I measured from that seam allowance exactly 4 centimeters. So that's now the final size of my waistband. And I'm going to go ahead and just herringbone stitch that into place. Same as how we do the horsehair, attaching into the seam. And I'll just stitch from the horsehair. I'm not going to do any knots, just stitch 3 times in the same place. And then to the seam allowance, back to the horsehair, back to the seam allowance. And I'll just go and do the whole waistband like that. Something I forgot to mention and didn't check, but fortunately I survived this time, is to check your waistband here. When you stitch that the waistband actually does connect. Because sometimes you're a little bit high, a little bit low there. you want to see something like this or something. I mean, like that would be better, but in any event, that must be gouache. Here you can see it's been herringbone there. And then what I did, this end, because I'm such a cowboy, I just cut however long I want. At the end of the day, this must turn back at least 3.5 centimeters from here because I do want a seam there. I feel it's better to have a seam all the way around. And then I want this to come back a little bit over the fly. This portion here, I cut a separate one. And this, I just want, I'm going to put it kind of like that. I want this to have that triangular shape that must cover there. And this, I just want to kind of get to the edge of where the, this portion of the fly is. The reason why I want like that, because this shirt catch, I don't want to be too close here, it creates a lot of bulk. And then here also, when this is done up, it's going to close like so, and the button is going to be here. And I'd rather not have the button on this piece of the shirt catch. So that's why I want this to come far enough back, so to have the button on this piece of fabric. If not, no one will die. And if this is not long enough, I actually did my measurements and didn't just cut this a whole kilometer, then I can just take like this separate piece and stitch it on here. But in this case, it's long enough, so I'm just going to use that section. So what I did, you can see there just at the end, I just turned that back and stitched it down. Same on this one, turn it back, stitch it down. So let's see, we do this one first. I'm going to just match that up. And I want to see, where is this now? Around here. It really doesn't have to match. It will just look a little bit more fashion if it does. Match that up there. So here you can see this we actually want to open, and you see that's why we don't want to pull too far, because if that was stitched, we wouldn't be able to get in here to that seam allowance. So let's make sure that's all pinned down. I'm going to pin that kind of like so, just so I see where is the very edge of that piece. Okay. So in here, I want to come and actually, you see, so this is going to be 4 centimeters. So this I want to be 2 centimeters as my center. So I can bring this piece up kind of like this. I can have that gouache over there, and then back like that. And then on 1 centimeter seam allowance, back over here, and then to here. So I'm going to start like that, just keeping that shape over there. And then this you'll see we're just going to tuck in a moment. For now, I just want it to be reasonably straight. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Then on this portion, like I said, I do want a seam there, so I'm going to leave maybe 0.5 centimeter. Now I could have actually corrected this on this pants, but I actually did forget, because if you remember, we shaped this up, this portion here, to give better shape over here. And now this is not flat, now it comes at an angle, and this is going to be straight, so that's going to actually not be super great there. So I'll correct that on the pattern for the next one, but for this one, that's just how it is. Yeah, that's that. So here, I'm going to come in from there, stitch around there, around the edge, and then on that 1 centimeter, join it all there. You see this, because it's on a herringbone with a base, it tends to shift around. But, we'll do that and then just check as when we fold here that it is actually all lining up. Oh, and actually I didn't even notice, but what I can do here is I do need to stitch this down. So here we can measure, it should be about 1.5. So about 1.5, I'm going to do it actually 1.25. Because that will, I think, give me sufficient. No, it'll be fine. So I just want to stitch it and go around and just secure all of that. So that, it's going to now be held there, not flapping around like that. That's that. Boom. There we go. There's the little shape that I've got in there. You see here, just stitching next door to the horsehair. And I'll just trim that down. And let's trim this a little bit more. Now, depending on the fabric, sometimes I'll put a bit of fusing here, just that it's a little bit thicker. It is a chinos, it is really quite thick. So I'm not going to put that extra thickness there, especially because we have, this is a portion that's overlapping. There we go. Yeah, see, I like that shape to kind of continue in a nice line. If it doesn't, I feel like I say that line a lot, no one will die. Yeah, and this will then just tuck in and get caught in the understitch or the stitch in the ditch when I stitch it through there. So for now, I'm just going to see that that's fine. I'm going to kind of iron it with my fingers a little bit. And in this portion, so you see here, it's not 100% straight there. It's kind of going a little bit smaller. And this will often happen. And I kind of like that style because then it means that that overlap tab fits neatly across the waistband rather than being exactly perfectly the same size, because it tends to actually overlap a little bit. Let's see what this looks like. Also, one thing I do when I'm stitching here, I don't stitch exactly to this other stitch. I leave maybe I stop maybe 1-2 mils before, so that it can just sort of fold itself there neatly. If it's stitched exactly to that piece, I feel sometimes you get a little bit of a kink there. Doesn't look so great. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so again, I'm ironing with my fingers. And then let's see. Yeah, so you see here, like I was saying, ends up being a little bit shorter, and I think that's actually fine because that means it will fit neatly and perfectly in there. This piece also, yeah, I think everything is going to fit quite lacquer. So these portions, because I forgot that, everything's a little bit topsy-turvy. Just push that again. So here I'm going to go around and just attach that to the seam allowance. Not that it will really matter, it just makes me feel better. And then here, I'm not going to fold exactly on the stitch, because if I do that, then I stitch it here. When this turns under for the seam allowance, it's going to pull that, and you're going to get a funny bubble there. So I'm going to make sure that this I leave maybe a quarter centimeter, and then fold it up, and then I'm going to stitch it here at the top in the seam allowance, right here. So I'm going to do that for the belt loops, and then I'll carry on from there. Yeah, so belt loops stitched up. Now I'm going to put the shirt catch in, and the shirt catch, you see this portion here, this is 3/4 centimeter, it's not quite a centimeter, and it's better to stitch in there, so that, because if you stitch here, there's a lot of bulk on that canvas turning around. So when I line this up, I want it to be here, maybe 1.5, 2 centimeters there, and I need to line it up so it's not quite on the edge. Do it right there. Not quite on the edge of the seam allowance, but a little bit under, so that when I stitch it from this side, I stitch next to the horsehair, and it catches this side roughly on the, just next door to the canvas. And that's basically that. I'll pin that all up there, and I'll give it a stitch on this side next door to the horsehair that we've put there. And then I'll just put a piece of fusing here before I flip it over, just to kind of glue that horsehair in place. There we have it. Once I've stitched that, put the fuse, and I've ironed it up this way. I'm going to also turn these pieces around again, iron them properly. So I'm going to go and do an understitch along the edge there, just to keep it all secure. And then I'll iron that down, so that that's going to be lacquer and caught underneath the outside edge. This portion, I'll just, once I've done that top stitch, do a bit of an iron to line that up so that it's going to get caught when I do the stitch in the ditch. And then this portion, so you see this, I'm going to iron up like that, so that when I stitch in the ditch here, it's going to catch there. And then this portion I'll fold like that, so that we don't have that raw edge. And I do cut this with a zigzag, because it is quite a bulky thing, so I can reduce the bulk like that. Yeah, so just fold like that, stitch in the ditch. Although I won't stitch in the ditch first. First I'll do the center back. But for now, yeah, I'm going to do that top stitch, and then make sure that all of this is totally perfect. I usually stitch like a portion here, just to, because I stitch to underneath the belt loop, cut, come here, stitch, stop like that, go all the way around. So I usually just do this first portion, and then go back and do the center back, and then do the rest of the stitch in the ditch. Yeah, that's what's happening. So you see there, sorted that out, and I stitched just to the first belt loop there, stitch in that ditch. Now this side, actually, I just didn't like the look of it, so I turned it around again and just stitch the corners down there. So I'll do the same, just stitch in the ditch, and then here on the center back, I just stitched my 3 centimeter seam allowance, joined here at that mark to 1.5, and then here to 1, and then joined up to the crotch seam. And I'll go over that with a very narrow zigzag, so it gives me a little bit of stretch on this portion that takes a lot of strain. Here, I don't stitch all the way, I leave that little bit of a corner there, and I will iron that up like so that we can just have that, not those edges not sticking out. And yeah, that's basically that. I'll then finish it off. This one, you can see this crotch piece comes just to where it's joining into there. Obviously, I'll trim that down. So that's great. I'll just stitch that to there. If it was too short, I would just have joined a piece that comes all the way down. And I like to stitch this open like that. I don't like to stitch it together. I feel that's a little bit bulky. So open it up and stitch one side, and I stitch, that portion closed like that, and then that one side. And yeah, let's do all of that, and I'll come around and do some more finishing off things. I'm doing this over a few days, so I'm kind of losing track of what's happening. But at the end of the day, that's been stitched with a zigzag. Here, I just fold that in. I'm going to stitch that separate, stitch that together. Here I stitched this in the ditch. You see it's caught that edge there. And like really I should from here go with black, but I'm going to go from there with the black on the bobbin. This one I had to redo a couple times so that I could get this nice and symmetrical. And same, I'll do blue on the bobbin until there, and then black on the bobbin for the rest. Stitch in the ditch, and then obviously buttonhole. Now, for someone with a bit of a stomach here, the stomach kind of pushes down on this. So I actually tend to not put the hook and bar here because that gives you like a bit of a uncomfortableness here. So I leave that and just have button each side so that like here it's quite comfortable. It really depends on the style that we're doing. Sometimes I'll put the hook and bar here, button, but in this case we're just doing button. And then I'll do a bar tack at the top here and at the bottom of the pocket, pushing that seam allowance to the side that I wanted. Let's go and do all of that. Yeah, so there we have it. We've got bar tacks there. Now here, I always check my pockets because invariably one is bigger than the other. And here as well, I'll cheat and just put the bar tack a little bit higher to close a bit of the pocket off so that both pockets are the same. Put my buttonholes there by machine. And now I'm going to go over that buttonhole by hand to give it that level of fash. And then, after that, of course, I'll close this fly, check where the buttons need to align, and put those buttons through. You see this one now, it's not that button, it's just a little bit in front of the shirt catch. I don't think it really matters, it just makes me feel better. And yeah, that is that. For the hem on this one, because it's like a more luxury chino, we've done the blind hem, but we could also do that by machine had we wanted to. And then yeah, there's also a bar tack here because this gets a lot of tension and tends to tear out of the waistband there. And other than that, those are the chinos